Welcome, everyone. This is Luke Johnson and Robert Schut, and we are from Noetic.online, the social media educational platform and app. You can visit a beta test version of Noetic.online right now as I try to get it up and running. And the new version of the app will be out shortly once I work on all the mechanics and the bugs. In the meantime, Robert and I will be starting a new seminar series, and he's going to be leading most of it. Because I have to pivot to CEO job title now. So Bob's going to be doing most of the talking today, and we're going to be covering Soren Kierkegaard's The Point of View from My Work as an Author, a report to history. And I have the Harper Torch Books edition, which was edited and with a preface by Benjamin Nelson. What copy are you using, Bob?
I'm using, it says the same thing as yours. Does it look like that? Okay.
Damn. So rarely do we have the same translation and copy and everything. This is very cool. How about, before we jump into it, why don't we share our impressions of the text? How would you go first?
Okay, I would say that I think this is a good work for somebody to begin their study of Kierkegaard with. There's no perfect place because each book seems to assume you've read a certain amount of him already. But I think that this gives you an idea of where the author is going to try to bring you, where Kierkegaard is going to bring you, why he's using some of these pseudonyms, gives us a little bit of a background about him, helps us understand the individual, the author, which is really great. And then we can move along to the present age and to some of the other more difficult book. So I did like this, and I found that I think we're going to be able to do a good job on this one. I'm looking forward to it.
I thought this was a rad book. Like, I enjoyed it so much. If you guys have been following along, it took us about 6 months to cover Works of Love, which was very rewarding, but it's to be able to do. I think we'll be able to be more conversational about this text because Kierkegaard pretty much comes out and says what he's always wanted to say here. This is kind of his opportunity to clear the air, to deflate any sort of rumors there are about him, to really set the tone for how his authorship ought to be interpreted. And I like this aspect of Kierkegaard. There's sort of a self-righteousness to it. There's a clarity to it that you don't necessarily get in the other works because he's not fully committed to those other personas that he writes those other works in, right? This is sort of like a purified, unmitigated Kierkegaard. In the other instances, he's using the indirect communication method, and he's taking on these disguises, right? And he sort of has to pretend to be a seducer, and he sort of has to pretend to be a judge, and he has to pretend to be a philosophical religious person, but he just gets out with it. He says what's on his mind here. But I would quibble with you a little bit about whether or not this ought to be where someone should start. Because on the one hand, I agree, right? Because it's remarkably clarifying. It sets the stage and you're like, okay, now I understand what this dude is trying to do with his authorship and where he's coming from. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it does take away some of the struggling aspect that is part of coming to know Kierkegaard as a thinker, right? Like it's a little bit like a person telling you that you ought to go see this movie and not filling you in on all the details, but spoiling it a little bit for you.
Yeah, true. But and I think there's the plus and minuses. No matter which book you pick up, there's going to be plus and minuses. I think, but. Yeah, I would consider this as one of the earlier books then to try to get into it before you struggle too much with him.
Right. Well, yeah, it was funny. Like I've been telling people that I recently saw Boys from Brazil, and they're like, "Well, what's it about?" And I'm like, if I tell you I want you to go see Boys from Brazil, but if I tell you anything about the plot, I'm going to kind of ruin it for you. Yeah, and it's kind of the nature of this book, right? But
right.
So, maybe we'll just let the chips fall where they may. We'll see what happens. Maybe this will get people interested in Kierkegaard and they'll be thankful for it.
Yeah, please let us know too. That's what we try to work off of what other people might suggest. So if anybody has an opinion on this, please let us know. So we can do more along this line.
Or turn it off now if you hate spoilers.
Yeah.
All right. Why don't you jump into it, Bob?
Okay, so this particular book was written in 1848, but it wasn't until 1859 that it was published by his brother, Peter Christian Kierkegaard. And he begins a quotation here. He says, "In everything, the purpose must weigh with the folly," according to Shakespeare from Henry IV. And he's trying to just kind of set us up here to say we have to kind of weigh things that we get. And this probably isn't as meaningful to a newcomer as it probably is to Luke and myself, because he does a lot of folly along with things, and he tries to keep everything balanced, but he's very witty about how he does this and very careful. He's very careful how he approaches certain subjects, and I found that he chooses words very carefully. In my small career as an author, this is what I always try to do. I always try to be very careful each individual word that I select, because I know how easy it is to get the wrong opinion, and how each one word might give a different slant on what you're really trying to say. Even though the words may mean the same things, there's just a certain clarity that comes along with some words that aren't there with others. So I guess it's appropriate that we start out with what he calls ambiguity. He mentions his work as being very ambiguous. His works, I guess I should say, as being very ambiguous between two particular topics. One is the aesthetic topic. The other one is the religious topic. By aesthetic, he probably means beauty, as well as feelings and emotions. And I would kind of put it together and use the term, the sensual idea of life. Right. And so I think that's the way he's trying to get, and it fits in very well when we look at it as the sensual, more so than as the beauty. So
what I thought was kind of interesting that he did in this text is he kind of outright sort of associates this sensual aspect of life with youth, right? That there is, and there, you're going to talk about this a lot, but how he how these stages are sort of linked to the development of the individual, just from a biological perspective, and how he had to find the right tenor to convey both of them.
Mm-hmm. And then by the religious side of this ambiguity, he means more the spiritual ideas that we have about God, as well as the relationship that we have with God. And I, after having read the first couple chapters, I kind of have my own way of defining this, and is a sense of divine holiness. So I'm going to probably use that idea of a holiness more so than the religious, because I think religious is, like I say, it was one of those words that if you say I'm a religious person, it creates a certain frame of reference to yourself, and they figure you're dressed in robes, you've got prayer beads, you know, maybe you wear certain hats. Who knows what the word religious might mean to somebody. You have statues in your basement that you pray to. It could be anything. So I like to think of the word as holiness, but we'll see how if I can work that in. And Luke, you can give me some feedback if you would agree.
Yeah. I think the thing to think about with religiousness, and something that, you know, Kierkegaard was probably on the watch for, was that his time, you know, there are a lot of individuals that considered themselves to be religious, but were sort of just pantomiming kind of what it meant to be a religious person in Copenhagen at that time. And it perfectly parallels to American culture and everything like that, what's going on right now. Like if you were to, you know, the word, if I'm like, if someone were to ask me, oh, am I a religious person? I would hesitate on it, because I know that there's all this baggage that's associated with it, that like, I must like want to like, I don't know, play like two-hand touch with Jerry Falwell, and you know, and you know, be best friends with Pat Robertson. You know, like that's not necessarily what it means to be religious. To be religious, like you said, there's this more profound sense of holiness.
Yeah. So the question that we're going to start with is: was Kierkegaard an aesthetic author writing about religious ideas, or was he a religious author writing about aesthetic ideas? Or was there a transformation of one to the other? So did he begin as an aesthetic author and become a religious author, or was he a religious author and became an aesthetic author? So this is what we're going to try to do. He's going to solve this problem for us. And it's important that we do. This gave me a clearer vision as to why he did what he did. He played and toyed with these ideas and how he would approach the reader, but it was a very serious play that he did. He really tried to figure out, how can I help my reader transition from one point to the other? I'm going to hold off a little bit on what this transition is, get a little bit more. But he did take his religious writings very, very seriously. He didn't start out with religious writings. He felt the need to prepare his reader, and perhaps maybe even himself, by first adopting the aesthetic way of writing. So some of his earlier works, as we'll see, were works that dealt more with the sensual things of life. So we'll see. I'm trying to think of one work when I thought about that. Is that what was the most sensual one you think that he did? My Life, The Seducer, right? The Seducer's Diary.
The Seducer's Diary. I mean, it depends on what we mean by sensual, because not, sensual doesn't necessarily have to be sexual.
Right.
I think he would think that there is something sensual about the love for Don Giovanni too, right? Yeah. The oral pleasure and all these different rankings of aesthetic types that go on within this realm of immediacy. So, yeah. I think sensual is to be understood rather liberally here. Yeah,
sure. The Seducer's Diary would probably be one of the books that would come up in your mind when you were thinking about which was one of his aesthetic books. Either or would, of course, be another one. It was affirmed and confirmed by him that he was, in fact, a religious author, a Christian one specifically. He didn't hide from that idea. He wrote about the difficulty about not only becoming a Christian, but especially becoming one out of the illusion of Christendom. So if you haven't heard us before, Christendom was what we would call the Christianity kind of Kierkegaard's day in Denmark, where everybody who was born was baptized and became a Christian, so to speak. And so we'll get into that a little bit later too. But Christendom we keep separate from Christianity. He certainly does. Christendom is those who he believes are under this illusion that they're Christians. Now, he loved Socrates, and he found himself finding things in common with him. Was this an essential part of Kierkegaard's character, or was it an attempt to imitate Socrates out of respect? So that's kind of just a short little question. Do you have any feelings, any ideas on that? Was he, in a sense, trying to imitate Socrates a little bit in what he did because he was so fascinated by him? Or was this just merely an essential part of Kierkegaard that he found himself in common with Socrates?
I'm going to have to think on that one moment, because while you were doing that, I was looking something up, which I want to share.
Okay.
I just wanted to do one little clarification here. It's a minute thing, but I want people to understand that the Seducer's Diary is actually a chapter within Either Or and not a separable work. And I just want to clear up that just real quick. And what's interesting is that there's a version that was translated by the Hongs. I believe you can get just by itself, and John Updike did the foreword for it, and I thought that was worth mentioning. I didn't realize a writer of that magnitude had done a foreword for it. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, okay. Well, I was thinking about the way he always speaks about Socrates. He holds him in very high esteem. Was he consciously or perhaps even unconsciously trying to imitate Socrates? Or was he this part of his essential character that he happened to discover, hey, I'm a lot like Socrates, we have something in common. So it's kind of an idea that I guess there's no right answer to it, but I thought we might discuss it for a minute.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's no secret that Socrates was one of his heroes, right? Mm-hmm. Like the concept of irony, his master's thesis, which ultimately would be turned into a doctoral dissertation, so that he had, his PhD. He was a doctor. It was so good that it was like sort of retroactively bestowed upon him. Involved a lot of the exploration of how Socrates used irony, sort of this deflationary irony, in order to open people's minds up to the fact that they don't really know anything at all. Mm-hmm. So I think Kierkegaard holds, Kierkegaard has a very unusual relationship with Socrates, because I think he loves Socrates because he almost sees him as sort of a necessary historical step before Jesus Christ can be introduced into the world, right? Like, it's Socrates sort of cleanses the intellectual temple so that truth can incarnate and really take its place there. Mm-hmm. Like Socrates had to go around intellectually demonstrating the falsity of all our knowledge, right? So that the real truth could be brought in. Mm-hmm. Socrates by himself is not enough for Kierkegaard, but there's something about these deflationary tactics of Socrates that he very much admires.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a good assessment. There is a very close relationship between the two, and that's why I wanted to just stop for a minute and talk about that.
Isn't it in this book where he talked about how Socrates
is a pre-Christian Christian?
Yeah.
Let
me find the quote while you keep talking.
Okay, yeah, I've got it in my notes as well here.
Oh, you've got it too?
I'm not sure I have the quotation, but I have a notation of it. He thinks that there's something of a flaw in someone who feels the necessity to defend his work. And because of this, he didn't try to defend his work, thinking it would degrade his mission as an author. And I got to thinking, maybe this is, in a sense, a reflection on how Jesus didn't defend himself before Pilate. It would diminish. Christ would have diminished himself had he tried to defend himself before Pilate. And I found this true, I think, in my own experiences. The more you try to defend yourself, the digger the ditch you dig for yourself. It's better just to kind of present the information and then let people believe what they want to believe about it, within reason, of course. But when people start defending themselves, it doesn't usually end well. He challenged people to think about what they're doing and perhaps even why they're doing it. Now, when he talks about something like this, what people are doing, he's talking about what they're doing as Christians, how they're representing themselves, their conduct, who they are, really. He did everything to try not to become famous. This can't be emphasized enough, I think, by us today, especially in this generation, Luke, because he sacrificed himself for his works. Kierkegaard was not out after fame. And this is something that we really ought to pay attention to today. It would help us to remove the superficiality of what we see happening today. Everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame, and everybody wants to sell their life story. Everybody thinks everything is marketable to become famous. But Kierkegaard, one of the greatest authors that ever lived, didn't want fame. And I think that's a remarkable thing to say of his character.
I think what's great about this for Kierkegaard is Kierkegaard understood this fundamental truth about the world. That it's drunk.
Yeah.
The world is a drunk. The world is a lie. And so if Kierkegaard had been celebrated, right? It's like being celebrated by a bunch of liars and by a bunch of drunks, right?
Yeah.
Once you come to the realization that the world is a lying drunk, how can you take any pleasure in it elevating you in any way? Like, like for instance, if like off camera earlier, Bob and I had like this big sort of epiphany this year where I too realized that the world is a lying drunk, a harlot, let's say. But and this happened at the same time when a great honorific was bestowed upon me as well.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually, and truth be told, it was probably one of the worst days of the year for me.
Really?
Right? Yeah. And I'll go into that some other day. But
yeah,
what I'm trying to say here, I would be very suspicious of myself if the world started driving dump trucks full of money up to my lawn and handing out all sorts of golden idols and things of that nature. If that ever starts happening, I think I might be doing something wrong. Like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, remember Kierkegaard told the story, I forget which book it was in, about there was a time when he was bestowed an honor and he got a good book review, and he was so upset by it that he told a story about the little girl who was not picked on by the kids in school. And they picked on all the other kids, but they didn't pick on her. And she said, why don't they pick on me? What's wrong with me? And he kind of related it to himself, that he said, I've got to do something because I don't want to be popular. I don't want to be one of the in crowd. And that was kind of a clever little story he told.
But what if someone was listening to this and they were to say, oh, you guys, Kierkegaard, Bob, Luke, you're asserting your individuality. You're just reveling in your countercultural tendencies. And this is just your own way of feeling important to say that the world is some sort of lying drunk and that you would rescind any sort of honor it ever gave to you. How would you respond to that criticism, or if we could defend Kierkegaard in that matter?
How would I respond to it? Well, yeah. I would just have to say, you'd have to examine my life. You'd have to look at me, and you'd have to see how I've lived my life up to this point. And that's all I could say. But like Kierkegaard said, I wouldn't defend myself, because if I defended myself, then I would kind of degrade the whole issue, and I kind of give validity to that. So,
right. I mean, the Bible itself, the Bible tells us to be separate from the world, right? Mm-hmm. To come out from it, right? Yeah. And to be sober. So the question is, what is this separation that's occurring, right? What is this holiness that is different from the drunkenness of the world? Right. It's not just this sort of knee-jerk reactionary individualism, right? It's a sincere, legitimate religious individualism that doesn't really take into consideration how our outsider status is perceived.
Yeah, I think as we go through this, I think we'll actually approach that idea that this is really what authentic Christianity is about.
Yeah.
And it's how to remove yourself from the world. And it's a little different than what maybe some people might think. And we'll see when we decide as to the validity of what Kierkegaard is doing here, when we can talk about that and actually analyze his style and whether this actually works or not. We'll enter into that discussion again. So that's great that you bring it up now.
Right, proceed.
Now, he says, if there's one thing that cannot be understood by the public, especially in a half hour, it's true Christian self-denial. It requires fear and trembling and silent solitude for long periods of time. And I think this is almost a partial answer to what we were saying. So true Christian self-denial is staying away from the public, away from all the honors and so forth that we're given. And this isn't something that we're accustomed to in our day. This has actually invaded the church of our day as well, this idea of becoming famous, becoming popular, which is really dangerous to the gospel message. He says that he cannot fully explain his work as an author because his relationship with God is personal and private. And for many of us, it exists in an area of contemplation and seriousness. So we can summarize now a little bit here what we have so far. In saying that he was a writer, he uses the aesthetic and the religious approach to his writings for a particular reason which is yet to be revealed. And that there's an ambiguity here between the two, which he admits to and will soon kind of remove this ambiguity. He wants to be taken as a serious author and is not in for it. Is not into writing books for his fame or for the money in it. He's a true inspiration to any of us who might choose to be authors of any serious nature. So next we enter into a section that I call duplicity. In part one, Kierkegaard speaks about duplicity now. This duplicity is the confusion between being an aesthetic author and a religious one. Can one really be both? Or can you only be one at a time? Or how does this work? This is the problem with the duplicity. How can you be both? And he says it's up to the author to make this evident. This is a conscious effort on his part to play the one against the other. So he uses a term now called dialectical distinction, which, to the best of my ability, means a translation of modes as one changes like from theory to practice. So what we will find out is, I think this dialectical distinction is how we change from the aesthetic to the religious mode. Now, I don't know if you've come up with a different idea of what he was trying to say here by dialectical distinction. Did you get any different view on that, or did you just kind of read past that?
No, I mean, I don't have anything that I'd like to contribute right at this moment. What do you have some page numbers there that I can perhaps peruse while you're talking about it?
Oh, well, it would probably be in the beginning of this section here.
Well, while you're looking at that, I want to share. Earlier, I made the promise that I would share the quote about Socrates, and I was able to find it on page 41 of the Harper Torch Books edition. And Kierkegaard says, although ever so many parsons were to consider this method unjustifiable, and just as many were unable to get it into their heads, in spite of the fact that they all of them, according to their own assertion, are accustomed to use the Socratic method, I, for my part, tranquilly adhere to Socrates. It is true, he was not a Christian, that I know, and yet I am thoroughly convinced that he has become one. And that's on page 41 of the Harper Torch Books edition. Okay. So I wanted to have the right quote before us.
Okay, he talks about dialectical reduplication, which is probably a little bit more of what I was after in the definition. He uses, I think, the two phrases, but dialectical reduplication, that he's reduplicating something. It's on page 16.
Okay.
He speaks about this. Yeah, see if you can come up with anything on that as well.
Keep talking.
Okay. Now, one might think that one might use these two modes of authorship because he started out as an aesthetic author and then became a religious one, perhaps through a religious conversion. This would not be impossible, of course, and there's several reasons, however, that this does not appear to be so in his works. But just to make it clear, when a person experiences a religious conversion, many times they do start out with the aesthetic point of view, and it becomes a religious point of view. They may start out with a sensual idea of life, and then it may become a religious idea of life. But there's reasons that this isn't true. One reason is that this happened very quickly in his authorship. In the two edifying discourses, or either or came out almost simultaneously. And either or is an aesthetic work, and the two edifying discourses is a religious work. And they came out simultaneously. So this doesn't really show any transference from one to the other. It shows both were kind of there at the same time. One can see that both are present right from the beginning, and there is no apparent transition from the one to the other. He even had some books that were religious, that were the religious type, that were written prior to those that were the aesthetic, which would show a reversal if there was any kind of a transition. So this doesn't appear to be what was going on with him. The books weren't a reflection of his transformation from aesthetic to religious.
So if I have this correct, let me see if I have this correct. What he was concerned about is that because the books came out in a particular order, that people would attribute his own maturation to the release of the books. But what he was trying to say is, like, I'm being coy, and the kernel of the religious was always there. You just didn't necessarily discern it because you think I had this sort of like religious epiphany later on in life. Is that kind of how I am
right.
to understand this?
And as a matter of fact, I think it's in the next chapter, which we're not doing today. I think he even shows that he went to the extreme of trying to live his life outwardly to kind of reflect something, to help, in a sense, to deceive the public a little bit.
Yeah.
But we'll hold off on that since that's going to be the next episode.
Yeah. I'm like giving away too much here.
No, we don't want to give away too much. In the case of the above, the two discourses and either or, there was an aesthetic article that came out even between these two works. So in that short time frame, he goes from religious to aesthetic and then back to aesthetic again. So there's really no way you can trace this as a growth. He helps us to determine which you consider to be aesthetic and which ones were religious. And do you want to make a wild guess as how we can tell the aesthetic from the religious, Luke? The big clue he gives us?
I mean, it wouldn't be a wild guess. I think I could figure it out. I don't remember what his particular clue is. I mean, a lot of it's the signing, right? Whether or not he actually put his name on it.
That is the one. It's the pseudonyms. So the books that he uses a pseudonym, like Hoffniensis, and I don't even remember half of them.
Victor Arimathea.
Yeah, he's got these funny names as a pseudonym. And there are how he signed these aesthetic works rather than use his own name, Soren Kierkegaard. But for his religious works, he signs his name, Soren Kierkegaard. So he says that the first group of his writings were the aesthetic ones, and the later group were the religious ones. Of course, we have to consider that there are exceptions to this. Now, in concluding postscripts, he presents the problem on how to become a Christian. This was not an aesthetic work, but neither was it a strictly religious work. It was written under a pseudonym. So we now even see places where he mixes this up here between pseudonyms and religious. So, there's nothing perfect in Kierkegaard's world here. But it's a good indication, if it's a pseudonym, it will probably be an aesthetic work, at least in part. For 2 years, there was nothing but religious works that bore his name. He had at that time come out of his aesthetic disguise. So at one point in time, he said, okay, public, it's me. It's Soren Kierkegaard. These are my religious works. I really am writing these books. So let's summarize again here by saying that he was not an aesthetic author who became a religious one, but actually vice versa. He was a religious author who wrote aesthetic works. But this was done by his design, not by a transformation. Okay, now we're going to enter into part B of the book. The explanation is the author is confessing now to be a religious author all along. He says that his protesting this really would not have helped, but would have hindered his project. So when he was accused of being the author of some of these books, he didn't really want to address it. He didn't want to argue with these people, and he didn't want to protest it because he knew that it would hinder the project. He didn't want to get involved with that. He wanted the people to think through the writings. Like you were mentioning earlier, Luke, there's a lot of benefit to just working through the difficulties of his works. The protest was a way of releasing the dialectical tension that he was trying to create. And he did not want to release the dialectical tension at this time. He wants to keep the reader in a kind of tension until he must reflect within himself as a result of these internal questions that arise. So we get the idea that Kierkegaard here is writing at a different level than the way we're reading it. This is what makes him such a unique author, that he's 20 steps ahead of the reader. He's trying to lead the reader, and the reader has no idea he's being led. Now, when he uses this dialectical reduplication or transition, which I call it, he does so incognito, much like Jesus hid himself as he was the divine Son of God. Now, Jesus, when he went through the Gospels, we find out he didn't come out and tell everybody, hey, everybody, I'm the Son of God, and you're supposed to worship me. I'm God incarnate, and so forth and so on. But rather, he uses this, creates a tension. I'm the Son of Man. Oh, well, what does that mean? You figure it out. Are you the Son of God? You said that I am. Jesus creates this dialectical tension, not only in the readers of the gospel, but in the people that were actually confronting Jesus.
What can I ask you this?
Oh, okay, sure.
So this scheme that Kierkegaard hatched, right? You know, and I'm sure you'll talk about some of the more, you know, outlandish things that he confesses to doing, like, you know, pretending to go to a performance and only staying for like 5 minutes and then going home to give the perception that he was part of the dandy crowd or whatever.
Yeah.
And so he knew he had to cultivate a certain amount of bourgeois wit and status in order for people to, I guess, take his religious writing seriously, so they would be drawn towards it. And the reason why we can have some confidence in the fact that this plan was in place all along is because throughout the book, he talks about how he never once ever questioned his faith in God, that he was, you know, throughout the book, he'll talk about how his father bestowed this very melancholic faith on him at a very young age, that he was made like, and he actually sort of regrets that in his youth, he was sort of made to be an old man. And so he sort of had this understanding of what reality and faith was like way in advance of most people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's so foreign to me. That's so alien to me, because me personally, this has been a struggle. Like, and I sort of, you know, I will confess myself to be a born-again Christian now at 37, but it's been a long road to get here, right? And it took some pretty dramatic events. And I'm at this stage right now where I just like want to put on placards and ring a bell and be like, find Jesus, y'all. But so there's no subtlety to the way that I talk about Jesus Christ at all, because I figured it out much later in life. Now you weren't like that. I don't want to reveal too much, right? You've been in the faith much longer than me, and at a much earlier age. I mean, does it come more naturally when you enter into the faith to understand this dialectical reduplication technique, this leading people towards Christ with breadcrumbs rather than with a bullhorn like I am?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is a model that fits each of us as to how we grow. But I am going to touch on that later. But okay. I will say for now that I think that some of us go through stages differently. Some of us go through them all at once. Some of them go through them slowly. Some of them kind of loop through the stages. I mean, just from experiencing what other people tell me, I know for myself, well, actually, I haven't totally figured out how I got where I am yet, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad you thought about it.
Okay, if we were total incognito, or if he were in total incognito, he would have gone through life unnoticed. This is how Kierkegaard planned to do the same thing through such an ambiguity. I think he's addressing Christ here in the sense, if Christ just went through life as a rabbi and never really created this ambiguous tension as to his identity, he would have just gone through life, lived, died, and that would have been the end of it. But because he was who he was, it, along with him, created this tension as to his identity. And Kierkegaard is kind of trying to reduplicate that in a certain way. So to make this work his way, he would have to maintain this dialectical reduplication. So in the case of Christ, one must discover his identity through inward reflection and faith, not to mention divine revelation. So Kierkegaard may have been trying to create the environment that would allow reflection to meet faith through revelation. Kierkegaard will tell us later on, he knows he can't create a Christian. But what I think he's trying to do, without actually saying it, is create the environment that would be conducive to create the Christian. Letting God do the work, but him trying to create the environment. And that's a lot of times all we can do too. We try to create Christians, but we can't really do that, nor should we do that. So I have down here aesthetic author, question mark. So what does it mean that he was an aesthetic author? So he now begins to explain his production, in quotes, his production, as though he would have been an aesthetic author. If one assumed that if he was an aesthetic author, in other words, what would it look like if he really were an aesthetic author? It would be incongruous to explain his religious works. But if one assumed that he was a religious author, it would make much more sense. So what he's trying to explain to us here is, if you think I was actually an aesthetic author, it doesn't work. It doesn't logically fit the pattern of how I wrote these books. But if, on the other hand, you assume I was a religious author all along, it makes sense. It would be more clear to think of him as a religious author who used aesthetic techniques to accomplish his purpose than the other way around. So he gives us an interesting fact that when he wrote the book Either Or, he wrote the second part first. So that I didn't know until I read this and this, and I thought that was kind of unique, kind of a little giveaway there. When you write a book, usually you write it from the beginning to the end, but here he writes the end first, and then goes back and writes the beginning. And this project takes him less than a year. I think if I really took my time to study Either Or, it would take me at least a year to do that. But here he writes the whole book in a year. What do you think about that, Luke?
Well, it'd be interesting. I want to know more about what specifically he's talking about as the end, right? Because a lot of people forget that there's this little, like the true. I do believe the true end of Either Or is this little sermon from Father Taciturnus, if memory serves me correctly. And most of the second volume of Either Or is taken up by Judge Wilhelm. So it'd be interesting. I have some follow-up questions about, what was really perceived to be the end and how that shaped the narrative arc of that. But yeah, you and I haven't done a seminar series yet on Either Or. It's so intimidating because it's so long.
Yeah, we're
I imagine it would take us close to a year to cover it all. It blows my mind that he was able to do this. And I wonder, I'm trying to recall, does this book reveal to us like how he was able to be so prodigious? How, because on the one hand, I can kind of understand it because I've heard these anecdotal stories about, he gave up women and, he drank like 40 cups of coffee a day. I've heard stories about that. But something that comes out in this book is that he was a pretty sickly individual too. He would
Yeah.
Sometimes he would sometimes stay up all night writing and then be out of commission for a couple of days. So it's not like,
Not unlike somebody I know quite well.
well, I'll stay up all night, but I haven't. It takes a lot to slow this train down. But but I know I have a window here. I know it won't be like that forever.
Yeah.
But I mean, where do you think he got this superhuman ability?
Oh,
I mean,
this man was. He was a unique individual. He was like, I mean, how can people write songs one after the other, and come up with the imagination? He was gifted. I mean, look at all the people who write novels. I mean, they just pour out novels. But Kierkegaard was not writing novels here. What he was writing took a lot of thinking, very well orchestrated, as you can see here. Each novel, each book he writes fits into a puzzle here. Nobody can get into the mind of Kierkegaard. I certainly can, nor would I even try to attempt to do that. So I can't explain, other than he was just definitely gifted by God with a very special gift. And this is not something, to attempt to do at home. This is something that, unless you have the gift, there's no way you're going to do this.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we can say the gift, or he, like the Holy Spirit was using him, and we can talk about it like that. But I mean, I think we can say something concrete about his writing style. I mean, look, you and I know his writing style well. I mean, there aren't a lot of people who've studied it like we have here, in this way. And some of the patterns that I notice about him is that many of his books will have one theme, and that they're echoed in other books, and he'll repeat himself, like, so he can pad a book and make it, he can make it bigger than it needs to be in some instances. But then it's like he fights through that repetitious nature, and then he has this sort of luminous insight after he's sort of like repeating himself, flash of genius.
Well, it's like I said in some of the other reviews that we've done, it's like he's getting this revelation while he's writing. It's not like he's got it and then he writes about it. It's like his writing is part of the process that gives him the revelation.
Well, then it's almost like a divine sort of automatic writing, right? Like, it wasn't like automatic writing was something that occultists did when they were like trying to talk to demons and stuff. Like, Kierkegaard's almost tapped into the Holy Spirit in that way.
Yeah, but yeah, and I don't mean it like that. I don't mean like he took something took over Kierkegaard. I meant that it's part of the thinking process. I know that for me it is. When I write, it kind of takes on its own nature, and I start to see things more clearly as I write. And it's not like my hand is working and my keys are working on the keyboard and I don't know what's coming up until I read it. It's just that the ideas start flowing. It's like it produces that fountain of ideas.
It's an avalanche. So here's the question: could Kierkegaard have used an editor? Right? Should either or be like, I don't know, could he have said everything that he needed to say in either or Works of Love or any of the other massive works? Could he have said them in, like, I don't know, 25% of the pages? Well, sometimes I feel like he could have.
I think he did have an editor. I think he mentions that he had an editor here. So I can imagine. Can you imagine being his editor and saying, "Okay, Soren, we need to cut this out and this out"?
Who was his editor?
He doesn't mention him, I don't think, but he mentions that he did have an editor.
Probably the Holy Spirit. Yeah. Does the Holy Spirit count as an editor?
No, I don't think so. Now, he knew that he would not be able to be a religious writer right from the beginning. He knew that he couldn't come out and say, okay, I'm just going to start with my religious works. But he knew that he was going to have to approach this differently. He says that either or was a poetical catharsis, but he could not go beyond the ethical and into the religious. So either or, for those of us that have read that, brings us up to the ethical, but cannot bring us into the religious. And why might this be true, I ask? Perhaps the public had not yet been fully prepared for the transition. So he needed to do more work to prepare them for this transition. So while he was writing either or, he maintains this monastic lifestyle. His public lifestyle was so contrived as to portray himself so that the public would not see him as a religious author before the proper time. So this is what we were talking about. Even his lifestyle that he portrayed in public was meant to show himself as a bon vivant, as a not a religious person, but as an aesthetic person. At the same time, he lives this monastic lifestyle. So it just goes to show you how much thought he actually puts into this writing. And after this, he follows the two edifying discourses. He calls this the little flower hidden in the great forest. It was overlooked by his readers. On page 19 here of the book, what he says about it is, he says...
Can you remind me which ones are the two edifying discourses? Or I can look it up. Because we did the 18.
You did the two, I think, with someone else before we started working together.
Let me look them up real quick, because I forget their names off the top of my head. You go ahead and say what you're going to say.
Okay, you look them up, Tim. It says, no one took serious notice of the two discourses or concerned himself about them. Indeed, I remember even that one of my acquaintances came to me with the complaint that in good faith he had gone and bought the book with the with the notion that since it was by me, it must be something witty and clever. I remember, too, that I promised him that if he wished, he should get his money back. So he says, I held out either or to the world in my left hand, and in my right hand, the two edifying discourses. But all, or as good as all, grasped with their right what I held with my left. Did you get the names of the two yet? I'm looking to see if he puts it in his notes here.
I'm still here. Let me just read the straight Wikipedia page. All right?
Okay.
Let me just, because the two upbuilding discourses of 1843. All right, Wikipedia. Kierkegaard published two upbuilding discourses 3 months after the publication of his book Either Or, which ended without a conclusion to the argument between A, the aesthete, and B, the ethicist, as to which is the best way to live one's life. Kierkegaard hoped the book would transform everything for both of them into inwardness. In 18 blah blah blah. Upbuilding was translated edifying in 1946 when David S. Swinson first translated them. They became upbuilding discourses in Howard V. Hong's translation of 1990. Kierkegaard compared the poet A in Either Or to the upbuilding speaker in a book published in 1846. The decisive difference between the poet and the upbuilding speaker remains, namely that the poet has no end or goal other than psychological truth and the art of presentation, whereas the speaker, in addition, has principally the aim of transposing everything into the upbuilding. This is getting long.
Yes. Yeah.
Hold on. Oh, wait. Okay, hold on. I believe they're called The Expectancy of Faith, and every good and every perfect gift is from above.
No, we did that. We did those. They split them up differently, so they called them. Even when we did the 18, remember there was pieces of it that were the 2, the 4, the 6 discourses. So it probably got lost. I might have to do a little more research on that too and get back to it. I don't know the name of them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But if you
keep going.
If you find it, let me know. But I probably don't want to spend too much time on it. So
wait. To preserve one's souls in patience and expectation. Is that right?
Well, I haven't heard those, so that may be them. Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I keep going though.
Okay. He calls the reader, now he uses the term the individual, and he uses it as a category of existence for his reader. This theme carries through many of his works where he speaks about the individual. His religious writings were made to free the person from the crowd mentally. Kierkegaard was all about creating an individual from the crowd. to try to get people to stop thinking with the mob mentality, to stop thinking of yourselves as one of the pack, but think of yourselves as an individual, because that's how you're going to face God. You're going to face God as an individual. Now, at this point, if we didn't already discuss it, he was a religious author who uses the aesthetic approach to prepare the reader for a hopeful transition and perhaps a Christian conversion. Okay, so now we enter part 2. Shall we continue on, Luke?
Yeah, we should. I mean, I feel more confident about the fact that these 2 upbuilding discourses from 1844 are to preserve one's soul in patience, which takes its inspiration from Luke 21:19, and patience and expectation. I'm just confused, and I know those got integrated into the 18 upbuilding discourses. I'm just confused who I discussed those things with. I've done so much Kierkegaard, I can't even keep straight who I talked about it with. And if I didn't do it with you, maybe I did it with Craig, or maybe I did it with Matt. I'm not sure.
No, yeah, you may have done it with Matt. No, I think you did it with, I can't think of his name now. One of the other guys that you worked with the lady.
With CJ and Jordan, you think I did?
Yeah, I think you did it with CJ.
I could have sworn it was you. We did most of those, but
yeah, we did most of them. But I think this was early on. Now you did that with CJ.
Okay, all right. Sorry, guys. Sorry, did too much Kierkegaard.
Yeah. Part 2, chapter 1. We're now looking at things from the point of view that he is a religious author. We've established that now. At least he has in this book. And the subtitle here is that Christendom is a prodigious illusion. I love this chapter. I really like this chapter here. That Christendom is a prodigious illusion. And this is what he's going to work on. And we'll distinguish the difference between Christianity and Christendom, which we really have to do.
It sounds better. It sounds better than what I was saying. I was just saying it was drunk. He said illusion is kinder.
A prodigious illusion. Yeah, a little bit better than drunk. So what does it mean to be in a country where thousands of people consider themselves Christians as a matter of course and live in a different life than what we might expect from a Christian? They don't go to church. They don't think about God. And they don't have any obligation to God. They aren't even worried about breaking the law. Even atheists are considered Christians. Now you're saying, okay, Bob, you're getting ridiculous now. But actually, I ran across a pastor, a Lutheran pastor, who believed that atheists could be Christians. So anything is believable.
Well, so what was the justification for that?
Because
they would be so good that their good works would allow for salvation.
Something like that. That they were nice people. They lived quiet lives. They gave charity, but they didn't believe in God, so they would be considered Christians, according to him. So not impossible for people to believe that. Now he presents us with a... I'm sorry, what?
I mean, it's a comforting idea, right? Like, that's something I would want to believe, right? That ultimately, you know, that God would be so merciful that if an atheist were to die and be like, hey, I know it was hard to believe that I was the son of God and all this other stuff. Here, you get a mulligan. Now, do you accept me at the crossroads or whatever? Because, like, it's pretty obvious. You know, that's where, you know, but that's not what the Bible says, right?
That's
like,
right.
This is not scriptural.
Well, let's take it. Yeah, you take your chances. If you want to be an atheist and say, I'll just wait and let God decide for me, you're taking your chances. You know, as Monica says, hell is for eternity. So you're taking your chances with eternity. It's up to you. So he presents us with a novel idea that I have taken seriously. Perhaps we need to be missionaries to bring Christianity back into Christendom. So this is a very novel idea. he lives in a world where he considers Christianity to be Christendom, where not everybody believes in Christ, but yet they're still going around calling themselves Christians. Not everybody is behaving like a Christian, but they're still calling themselves Christians. So this is Christendom. So maybe we have missionaries to Africa and South America and to all sorts of people and sorts of countries. Maybe it's time we have Christian missions into Christendom. And that's what he's all about. This is like...
What an idea.
We'll get into this a little bit more as you know, as you look at the grin on my face, right? This is like jumping into a crowd or a mob where wanting to make changes could make life dangerous for you. I mean, for Kierkegaard to say, I'm going to make Christians out of you, Denmark people who think you're Christians, this is like jumping into a mob with burning torches and rocks and saying, you know, you're not Christians. Get a hold of yourselves. Not a smart thing to do. So he has a technique to do this. When Christianity began, it began by wanting to change the crowd. You remember that? Paul goes out into the crowds. And what happened to Christ and the apostles? As well as many believers. They became martyrs. The crowd kind of won out in a certain way. They made them martyrs. Once in a while, even pastors, he says, pastors might reflect upon this idea that maybe they're being in an illusion, but it doesn't usually go too far or last too long. But back to the question it involves here. What does an author, or why does an author want to begin with the aesthetic? The reason is so that he can get in touch with men. Now, this is very clever. It says people are more attracted to things when it appeals to the sensual. This is so true about books that contain, like the words that are bestsellers. You can almost guarantee a book is going to be a bestseller if it has the word mystery, hidden, or revealed in it. Any one of those words are going to fly off the shelf. People want to read something that's going to be mysterious, hidden, something nobody else knows, right?
Hidden mystery revealed. Luke Johnson's
hidden
first
mystery
novel.
Revealed. You've got them all. You've got a bestseller. Consider for a minute how popular those magazines are on the checkout stands. Do you remember in my day, before we had the internet, we had the National, the Star, etc. All these, what we used to call rags, but people bought them. They bought them.
Well, you know what's funny is a lot of these tabloid magazines are the ones breaking stories these days.
And the opposite is true. The ones that used to be the valid magazines are the ones printing Monkey Man found in Asia. Right? Where was everyone when this fake news was on the stand? Where were the demonstrations saying, hey guys, this is fake news. Don't read the Inquirer. Don't read the Star. This is just nonsense. But people simply laughed and they bought them and they read them like comic books. People continue to overestimate the intelligence of the people that seek after truth. People today have, go ahead.
I will say it's a little odd that Elvis's middle. I will say it's a little odd that Elvis's middle name is spelled wrong on his grave. I'm just saying. I'm not saying that death hoaxes happen all over the place, but it's a little odd they got his name wrong on his grave. Be a pretty easy thing to fix.
There's so much stuff going on today, I can't keep track of it. People today have lowered their standards of truth. What is truth today? Perhaps it's all about the meaning of words. What do words mean anymore? You know, as an author, I was so selective in each individual word I wanted to say. And yet today, words don't seem to mean anything today. They mean, like Humpty Dumpty said. Do you remember Humpty Dumpty in Alice?
Yes. Was it Humpty Dumpty in Alice in Wonderland? I thought he had his own sort of universe. But
no,
yeah.
He said words mean whatever I want them to mean.
Humpty Dumpty said that? I only remember
Yeah.
him falling. I only
The
remember
first,
Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall and
no,
all
this
the
was
kings.
before it fell off the wall.
No, I don't know the prequel
Oh,
to the
yeah,
wall falling.
he was the first postmodernist, Humpty Dumpty. They could trace postmodernism all the way back to Humpty Dumpty. So you can use that in one of your debates, Luke, if you wish to. Such an author must be ready at the right time to bring forth his religious work. So this is all about timing for Kierkegaard. Once he wins them over with the aesthetic works, he can now bring them to the religious using his religious works. Now this, I remember this term, at least I think I do, from psychology, that was called leveling, where this is when you come to the opposition's point of view in order to make that connection with them. So you kind of bring yourself down to their level, understanding their argument, so that you could now bring them to your conclusion. Excuse me. But he warns us that the religious should not be brought over too quickly. It shouldn't involve this sense of condemnation, for condemnation pushes too hard against the aesthetic feelings. So it's not like write a book about ethics, and then the first thing you open up within your religious book is, I'm going to condemn you to hell for eternity. He said that's not the way to make this connection, not the way to win people into faith. So what I wanted to do for a minute, I know we don't have too many minutes here, but I wanted to discuss whether you think his technique really worked. Has Kierkegaard, and maybe we should wait on this later, but I have it in my notes now. Has he really won many converts to Christ? I don't really know of anybody who's been saved, say it quotes unquotes, by reading Kierkegaard. I think that he's done for me, what he's done for me is he deepened my understanding of myself and my community of believers. But I wouldn't say that I was converted by Kierkegaard's technique here. And can we really look at Denmark and say his works really had a big impact on the religious culture of Denmark? Because they didn't. So although we both hold Kierkegaard in really high regard, can we really say that this technique worked the way he thought it would?
I would say yes.
You think that it did?
Yeah, I think it, I mean, and we have to have a conversation about what it means to convert people, right? Because ultimately, like, Kierkegaard can't do it, right? It's ultimately something that is between yourself and God. So Kierkegaard can really only make people receptive to God's grace.
But did he do that is what I'm wondering.
I think so. I think what Kierkegaard does, is that he makes Christianity a viable option to many, many people who would never consider it. Okay. Is it enough to push them over the edge to conversion? It brings them right there. It brings them right to the precipice. I know a handful of individuals.
Okay.
I know, and maybe even myself. Like I felt forming an intellectual alliance with Kierkegaard allowed me to sort of proudly call myself a Christian, even though I didn't really go as deep into the faith as I have now. It gave me some intellectual tools that made it so I was not afraid to identify as a Christian. And as far as I knew, this time last year, I would have proudly said that I was a Christian. Little did I know that I would have this deepening sanctification process that would go on this year, where I would become sort of I hate to say it, I guess I'm kind of a radical now. Like, I'm kind of a radical Christian, I was talking to Bob off camera earlier. Like, when Bob and I first started working together, I was to the left of him, and And now I might be I might be an extremist compared to Bob.
We shifted places a little bit here, huh?
A little bit. So I don't know, but I would say there are individuals who were led right up to Christ because of Kierkegaard. It made it a workable idea. And I would say, you know, this from my own personal life, I know that people in my own personal life are reading Kierkegaard because of the work that we've done. Now, whether or not they'll become Christians, I don't know. To be determined. But if you look at the long game, like decades and centuries, I would say Kierkegaard's method is working.
Good.
But over the short run, I would say no. It's not a quick fix. It's not gonna solve the world's problems overnight. But I think as time goes on, like I think he's probably more relevant today than he was when he was writing.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is more. Yeah. He's more effective at winning souls for Jesus Christ in 2017 than he was in 18. When was this one written? It was 40, and
published in 59, I think it was, or something like that. But after his death, postmortem.
So this would, I guess, this probably would have been written somewhere in the early 50s of the 19th century. So I think he's more relevant today, and I think he's still doing work today.
I would say that he's needed more today than he ever was before. So I'm hoping that there can be an upsurge, and that people really can come to read him more. I'm not so sure there's a lot of serious-minded people left, but I hope that there is. I hope I'm underestimating the public. But I know in my life, he's deepened my understanding as he has with you. So perhaps if I had come to him before I was a Christian, he might have had that effect of leading me up to conversion.
See, you were lucky because you got to be a Christian early on. See, he was like a bridge for me, right?
Yeah.
Just back to what we were saying earlier, like he was a pretty essential stepping stone for me.
Yeah. Now he says here, so when we evangelize, we must come to their level in order to understand them and their point of view. It should not be done by deception, but merely for the sake of knowing your adversary's point of view. Now this might work, actually, if you really want to teach somebody something, is what he says here. If you want to be admired, then you might try another technique. For true effort begins with self-humiliation. So what he's saying, this isn't a method that if you want to become a famous author, if you want to become admired by everybody, he says, I don't recommend this method to you because you have to humiliate yourself, which is what he did in the beginning. He didn't take credit for his work. And he had to live that kind of a lifestyle. If you take a man who's passionately angry and in the wrong, you might approach him from the point that he will instruct you rather than you correct him. So he's saying if you're going to approach somebody, and let's say this guy is passionate about what he believes, but yet you know he's wrong about it, rather than just standing there shouting back and forth at each other, what he's saying is to do is sit and listen to him. He said, let him teach you and see what you can learn. He said, then once you realize what he's doing, then he might be more willing to listen to you. If you're willing to listen to him, he might come back and listen to you. So this is his kind of approach as to why he goes in this nature. And I have a Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle response turns away anger, but a harsh word stirs up wrath. So it's a very good proverb to live by, Luke. A gentle response turns away anger, but a harsh word stirs up wrath.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so this is a way of opening up a person, he tells us. This can be used in a diabolical manner, of course, but Kierkegaard is not using it this way. We have to really want to achieve truth for the individual. Our concern must be for him and not simply to win an argument or even a conversion. this was a problem with me when I first got started. I thought that I had to win the argument for God's sake, you know, so I never backed down. But as I got more mature, I realized, you know, that doesn't do a service to God. That drags him into the gutter. It's better to walk away with dignity and not bother trying to answer trivial questions than it is to stand and confront people arguing and trying to outshout somebody else. So I've hopefully brought more dignity to my arguments by not shouting so much.
You have. I've never seen anyone converted to a point of view via argumentation. Like, no. I think if we're really to be honest about every debate that we have, and I think this is what the genius of Kierkegaard was, is that he understood that if anyone is going to change their mind on a subject, it's going to be psychologically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he had to do this method that we've been dwelling on so much.
Yeah.
Here, you know, because if you don't want to believe something, you'll come up with all sorts of rationalizations to dispel the counter argument. Like, I don't think I've ever won anyone to a position through logical argumentation, regardless of how perfect my reasoning has been. And I have the best reasoning.
Absolutely perfect, Luke. Flawless.
Flawless. I have the best words, and I use my hands.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't. Can you believe it that sometimes I fail to convey my point, even when I break out the hand movements?
Oh, you'll have to make a video the next time. So show me. He says that if you can't humble yourself, you're not serious about helping someone. If you have to make he says you have to make the other person interested in you. But don't forget that you must bring the religious forward. It's not just about making them interested in you. You have a purpose here. You want to bring them to the religious point of view. You start with the aesthetic, with all its magic, with the intention to bring him forward to the religious. So to be a good teacher, you have to be a good learner and put yourself in their place in order to understand what they understand and how they understand it. He has a complaint here about the Orthodox. Can you believe this? A complaint about the Orthodox point of view, that they shut themselves up into little groups complaining about everyone else who are not Christians. And this is not what Kierkegaard is trying to teach us. He's not trying to teach us that we need to withdraw all the true Christians and go in a little room and have their own little Bible studies and keep everybody else out who doesn't agree with them. This isn't what he's saying. But he's saying that we need to somehow bring other people to this new point of view. I have difficulty with this myself. They must see themselves as missionaries in Christendom. So if we want to bring a summary here to this section, we can say that if one really is a Christian and wants to convert Christendom, he will begin his process of conversion by starting out as an aesthetic writer. Or it doesn't have to be a writer, even an aesthetic debater. He also makes us aware of the illusion among Christendom as to what a Christian is and perhaps even truth itself. I have to admit I have a problem, and I'm really going through a difficult time right now with what I'm going to do, because I see Christendom out there and I see this illusion of Christianity out there, and I do so much want to break the illusion, but I'm not Søren Kierkegaard, and I can only do a little bit of what I do. Hopefully what we're doing here will maybe break through some of this illusion to other people. But it's a very difficult missionary, and I really hope that other people see it as a missionary, including yourself, that we don't necessarily have to go to Africa to find people who need to be converted. Sometimes within their own church groups that we are with is great numbers of people who are under an illusion that they're Christians, and they need to see the difference
what do you think Kierkegaard's Kierkegaard's description of the illusion of Christendom, right, drawing from this work and others, right, is that it got sort of interwoven with the state, right, and that theological matters were often decided by majority opinion and things of this nature, right? It became more external performance.
Yes.
When you look at the contemporary situation, you want to dispel this illusion that currently has its grips on modern Christendom. What would you say it is? Like, my own concerns about, like, I don't see Christians reading the Bible. I see them being profoundly biblically illiterate, myself included, up until very recently, right? It took a pretty humbling experience for me to actually dig deep into scripture. Mm-hmm. Like, there's little promulgation of actual doctrine. It's all sanitized and made into happy, feel-good, fun times, and an emphasis on entertainment, lots of songs and mm-hmm. things of this nature. Like, and so it's I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of I don't know. It's like the Mickey Mouse Club version of Christianity. It's not. That's my concern about it.
Well, what I'm going to say here is tune in next week or tune in 2 weeks and find out the answer to that question, because I'm going to answer it in our next podcast. But I don't want to give it away yet. Well, what I will say is, for homework, I want everybody to try to identify in the Christianity that they see the aesthetic. What is aesthetic about Christianity today? What is sensuous about it? What are they appealing to? Are they appealing to the senses, our senses? And if so, what sources are they using? How are they trying to appeal to our senses? And so that's where I would kind of leave this right now. Because I think when we answer that question, we can see where we are in modernity and where Christendom actually lies, and where it separates from Christianity.
Right. And the thing is, I've been going through Jung's Man and His Symbols, casual name drop there. And he talks about a lot of varieties of religious experience. We may have, it's not our diagnosis of the problem with modern Christendom is not, especially since we're in kind of a fractured Protestant nation, it's not going to be necessarily the same, right? Like for instance, like, we've got like people who handle snakes, right?
Yeah.
In their religious experience, and then we have, other people who rock out at church, like with the smoke machines and the modernized hymns and things like that. So, what we may say about one particular schism of Protestantism might not be the same that we would say about another schism.
And then we have the other sections that's filled with ritual and recitations that people have no clue what they're actually saying, but they've learned from childhood what to say and how to say it. So, this is all part of that sensual appeal of Christianity. Are we using that sensual appeal? And if so, what does that mean?
Should we all become Quakers?
Are we on that path? Are we on that path to become religious? Are they leading us into the religious like Kierkegaard? Or are they leading us away from the religious? Or are we simply stagnant and stuck in this mold until Kierkegaard or someone like him comes along and breaks that barrier that's holding everybody back from becoming religious? Or is the religious that narrow path that Jesus talks about? So we'll see in a couple of weeks when we do lesson 3.
I'm on it. I'm on the edge of my seat. Can you see this? On the actual edge of my seat.
You literally are.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing what you did today, Bob. I really appreciate the effort.
You're welcome, my friend.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have a lot of audio editing to do. I know a lot of people think that I just get to talk on TV, but this Noetic thing is a kind of a one-man show. So I got to go down in the basement and make it sound pretty now.
Okay.
But you can watch the live stream on YouTube for right now. I hope you all know that we do have improved audio versions, because I understand that my internet connection is not the best. It's very, but we're getting there. We're getting there. So thank you, Bob. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, not right now.
All right. I will talk to you again soon, my friend.
Okay, you too. Have a great night.